Hello, my name is Crystal All. Today's date is March 27th, 2015, and I am interviewing Dr. Charles Payne on the Ball State campus as part of the Ball State University African American Alumni Oral History Project. Thanks for coming out today. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
All right. So when and where were you born?
I was born in actually Collinsville, Mississippi, but I was actually raised in Philadelphia, Mississippi in 1942.
And what was Philadelphia like?
Well, it was during legal segregation, uh, uh, extreme racism. I lived in a black community. I went to a black church. Everything I did was in the black community, So I guess you could say it was a pretty hostile community. Although at the time growing up there, I didn't necessarily see it as, I knew there were dangers, but I didn't see it as hostile or as violent as looking back at it now, growing up there.
All right. What was your family like?
Well, to start the story, my biological dad was killed in a car accident about 5 or 6 months before I was born, and my mother and my father. I was the youngest of 5 kids at that time, and so my mother, I think, was like 26 or 27 years old, and suddenly she was left with 5 kids. And I had my dad's brother offered to help out with the family, and he asked her if he could take 2 of the boys and raise them himself. In the meantime, he had just gotten married himself, and he married a lady who already had a couple of kids, and he had an agreement with her that if she would allow him to take 2 of his brother's kids, that he would not ask her to have any more kids. And of course, she agreed to that. So he took a brother that's just older than I am and me, and raised the 2 of us. The fortunate part of that is that this uncle was educated. He had gone to college. His wife had gone to college, which was unusual for that time. So I grew up in a household of teachers. My dad later on became a principal, and then became what's known as a county agent. I mean, he was in agriculture, worked for the government. So I grew up in a household of teachers. In Philadelphia, where I grew up, most of the black people there rented their homes from white people. And the section of town that they would live in was named after the white person who owned all the houses. For example, Cook's Quarters would be known as, was owned by Mr. Cooks. But my family, we lived in what was called Independence Quarters. Now, what Independence Quarters meant is that all the blacks who lived there owned their own property, their own homes. So my parents owned their own home. I did not grow up in poverty. My household was not in poverty. We always had food, clothes, shelter. My dad always had a car, means of getting around. I grew up around a lot of poverty. My mother, my biological mother, spent her whole life in poverty, never got out of it. A couple of my brothers never got, well, as adults they got out, but as kids they grew up in it. So I grew up in a household of high expectation. Not overly religious, but we were religious. Up to 12 years old, we had to go to church, we had to go to Sunday school. But after that, my dad said, it's up to you now whether you want to go or not. Of course, during those days, the church was where it was happening. That's where everybody else went, so you went anyway, whether you really wanted to go or not. So that's typically, as I said, I attended all black schools. church, community, everything that we did.
And so you said you were raised by your uncle.
Right.
What was his name?
His name was Lawrence Payne. Right. Okay.
And then,
Well, what a little more interesting in this is that my great granddad was white, and he had two families. He had a white family, and he had another family with an Indian woman. Together, he and the Indian woman had 13 kids, and my granddad was one of the 13 kids. And because my granddad married my grandmother, who was extremely dark. And so within that family, my uncles and aunts were kind of like a rainbow. Some were extremely dark, some were light-skinned, some were in between that. This uncle happened to have been very light-skinned, and so was his wife. So I grew up in what was called, during those days, people would call it a high yellow, African-American, we call it a high yellow family with this. And people of light skin had advantages and were treated a lot differently from dark-skinned people. And some of the jokes, well, not jokes, but some of the funny things would happen is that during segregation as a black kid, there were businesses that we could not go in. You know, for instance, if there was a drive up, now we didn't have McDonald's and Burger King and all of that, but there were some drive hot dog stands and things. But there was one place in Meridian, Mississippi, we would stop at. Now, the only time as a black person you could go to some of these places is if you were working for a white person. And sometimes my dad would pull up in the car and I would get out and go up and order food. And they would serve me because they thought I was working for him. They thought he was white. And we'd always laugh about it. Laugh about that.
nice. What were your brothers' names?
My brother was named Perry.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. That's the one I grew up with, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then, so were you close with your other siblings and your mom?
Geographically, yes. We were about 20 to 25 miles from each other. But we really did not see them a lot. We would go out and go visit my mother sometime, but not a lot. My two older brothers left home relatively young. Neither one of them graduated from high school. They were actually migrant workers for a good while, and they ended up in Florida, in the Everglades, and they worked for a sugar plant. Gotcha, I don't know if you ever bought Gotcha sugar. That's a brand of sugar, but they worked at the sugar, and they worked there for years. They retired from that. They still live. Well, one is deceased now, but they still live there. My three sisters, actually, I have one whole sister, and I have two half sisters after I was born. They still live pretty much in the same place, within about 15 miles of each other. And when I go back, my parents are dead now. I go back. That's who I go to visit with them. I knew them fairly well. Now, one of my sisters, I was able to encourage to go to college. She went to college and graduated. The other two did not. So we're probably closer now than we were when we grew up with each other. Mm-hmm.
So you went to college, and your one sister went to college.
Yeah, and my older brother, the brother I was raised with, also went to college.
Okay.
Yeah, there were three of us that went to college.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So what sort of values were you raised kind of to follow?
Education was a key value in my household. My mother used to insist is that the only way you can guarantee survival is through education. And she used to say, now, when I grew up, black-white issues were really real. And so people discussed that frequently, and she would say that even white people have to respect you if you're educated. They may not want to, but they have to. And so education, honesty was always being honest, having integrity. Christian values, I said, not overly religious, but we believe in Christian values, and personal responsibility taking care of yourself, being responsible for things, making a commitment. We were really encouraged to be persistent. That if you told someone you were going to do something, you did it, and you could work. And we learned a lot of those values from actually watching my dad and my mom do things. My dad, as I said, was a county agent, and we had a little farm, and he had to work during the day. But I saw my dad regularly get up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and go out and plow 4 or 5 hours before he'd go to work. And we had hogs and cows and things, and we had to have all that done by 7 a.m.
That is early.
Yeah, so those were pretty much the values I grew up, taking care of animals, taking care of things. Yeah.
So then, did you try to instill those values upon your own children?
Yeah, I did. Education, a push. I didn't really have to push it that hard. It was something that my wife also is a professor here at, not a professor, but she's here at the counseling center. So they grew up in a household of educated people. The one brother that I knew, I said, was educated. My wife's siblings were also educated, although her parents did not go to high school, but they believed in education. So all of their cousins, the people that they know, were people who had gone to education. We went to church very regularly. The idea of honesty and having integrity, commitment, we try to transmit those same skills. Yeah.
Tell me about your kids.
My daughter, well, I probably shouldn't tell her age. She wouldn't like that. But she went to Burris here on campus, graduated from Burris, and she went to IU, graduated from there, and she came back home and lived with us for a year and a half, and she got a master's here at Ball State in design, architecture, not architecture, but consumer science and design. And she works now as a foster care. She's a case manager for foster care here in this region, and she's married, but they don't have any kids. She has 2 grand dogs, I call them. And my son graduated from the Indiana Academy. Went to Yale University and graduated from there. He got his MD, PhD from IU Medical School. He completed his residency at the University of Alabama Hospital and is now completing his cardiology training. In about 2 months, he'll be a board-approved cardiologist. And his wife also is a physician. And they live in Birmingham, and they're expecting their first child in July, and that's probably the greatest thing that's going to happen. Yeah.
And then what are your kids' names?
Okay, my daughter's name is Lauren, Lauren Payne Abram, and my son is named Gregory Allen Payne.
All right. So let's take it back. What was your elementary school like? You mentioned that you went to an all-black school. What was that like?
Yeah, I started elementary school out in the country, country school. We didn't have kindergarten. It was first grade, and all of my classmates were black. And all of my teachers were black. We used to start every morning. We had devotion every morning. We started, and devotion consists of a Bible verse, pledge of allegiance to the flag, and we would sing "God Bless America." We were very patriotic, whether we knew it or not. We were We had salute the flag, we had flag, all of this. And we did reading, arithmetic, telling stories and things. They enjoyed school. And having been a teacher myself and looking back at that, there were a couple of us in the class who were teachers' kids. And I can see now the advantage that we had over the other kids that were there. My mother taught first grade. Now, she didn't teach me, but she taught first grade. She was right there on campus. And the lady who taught first grade were her friends, things of this. And so I went through elementary school. Now, before I started first grade, I would go to school with my mom. She's my babysitter, that's how I'd go to school. So by the time I got first grade, I could already read and could do some math and stuff. So I made what during those days they call it double promotion. So I got double promoted. So when I was eight years old, I was already in the fifth grade.
Wow. Because
of double promotions and things. And my classmates tended to swear a lot. And one afternoon I went home, and I don't know what happened, but I was just swearing up and down this. And my dad said, that's it. Those kids he's in the class with are just absolutely too old for him, and put me all the way back to third grade. So I had to start over again. And when I got sixth grade, I got promoted when I got back to the sixth grade, I got promoted from the sixth grade to the eighth grade. I skipped seventh grade, into eighth grade. And at that time, eighth grade, junior high, as they would call it, would march commencement with high school. And so we had eighth grade commencement. And then I went to a school called Pine Woods Country Life School, which is a residential school in Jackson, outside of Jackson, Mississippi. And that's where I went to high school, which was, again, it was a residential school, but it was an all-black school. A lot different from public school. At that time, this was doing segregated school. Pine Woods was a enclosed school of its own. So it had a library. In Philadelphia, there was no library for black people. We had a gymnasium, auditorium, all this kind of thing there that would not have happened in my home, in my hometown. And most of the kids at Pine Woods was started really for indigent kids. But education was highly valued, and so most of us were what now you'd probably call college prep. That's about all we did was college prep. So most of us went on to college from there, and so I often give Pine Woods a lot of credit for my accomplishments for where I went.
All right. Did you experience any discrimination at your elementary or middle school or high school? Well,
in terms of the entire group being discriminated against, yes, because I had to go to all black schools. Mm-hmm. And however black schools were discriminated, then I got discriminated against. For instance, we never had enough textbooks to go around with this. Now, again, here's where, being the son of teachers, I had some advantages over other kids. I think it was my sixth grade year. I would always have books to take home. And some of my classmates didn't have any books because they'd run out of books. So they'd walk home hands-free. I always had a book bag with books in it. And when I got to the sixth grade, I didn't want to take all those books on the thing, so I decided not to go. This was the first day of school. The first day of school is when you get your books. And so I decided to hang around out in the woods for a while, and hopefully all the books would be given up by the time by the time I got in. So I got in maybe 45 minutes after school had started and everything. And the teacher looked up and said, "Oh, Charlie Ray, there you are," and reached under the desk and put my books up on top of the desk and gave them. He gave them to me. And everybody else just kind of like sitting there looking, like teacher's pet, and all this. So I got books whether I wanted them or not. I had books. Discrimination in Philadelphia was rampant. When you walked on the sidewalk, well, first of all, you could never touch a white person under any circumstances. And when you walked on the sidewalk, if you were meeting white people, you had to stand to the side so they could go by you and not touch with this. Or the easiest thing to do was get off the sidewalk. So quite often, I'd walk out in the street behind the cars rather than be on the sidewalk. And particularly if you were meeting young white boys, now you got an idea what they do when they were meeting. They knew you couldn't touch them. So they would get in front of you. You move over, they'd move over. You move over, they'd move over. Because there's a wall. There's only so far you can move, or you try to step on your foot as you go by. So rather than go through that, it was just easier to just get off the street. There were just so many little things like that. For instance, when you got your change, you didn't dare hold your hand out, particularly if it's a white woman. You didn't dare hold your hand out to get your change. They drop it on the counter for you to reach down and pick it up. If you were stopped by the police, now I was taught you hold your hands up. You don't wiggle your hands or fingers. You just hold them straight up with this, and the officer come. And of course, they ask for your driver's license, and quite likely your driver's license in your pocket. And so you ask for permission to get your driver's license, and this is where you had to really be careful. You couldn't get in a big hurry, Or sometimes they would pretend that they saw a gun or that they saw a knife or something that you had. So you had to be real careful how you pull your wallet and just everything out as you did. And then they would ask you to get out of the car, and the officer would stand really close to the door. And so as you open the door, you had to be careful not to hit him, touch him with the door, because you would have been assaulted an officer had you touched him with the door. So you had to squeeze through whatever space was there for you to do that. Then when they talk to you, you talk maybe at a normal voice, and they would call you the N-word, whatever you say. Speak up, I can't hear you. So you'd speak a little louder, and then you were accused of yelling at them. Who you yelling at? There were always curfews, but you never knew which night the curfew was on or what the curfew. Well, you didn't know if it was at 9 or at 10 or at 11. So at night, you were just always on guard and watch for the. Now, we live in a black community, and all policemen at that time were white. Now, so they didn't live in the community, and they weren't there all the time. But whenever they did come in, you had to be real careful, with this. If they were to pick you up, and this is mostly males that I'm talking about. If they were to pick you up, one or two places that they would take you to when they pick you up. One was they take you down by the railroad track, and if they took you down by the railroad track, they would call your name, punch you around. They maybe not too bad, and then you'd leave. They'd let you go home. But Philadelphia was a sawmill town. There were 3 large sawmills that were there, and it was called pulpwood. And this is where there was a pulpwood yard where they would strip the bark off. Yeah. If they took you out to the pulpwood yard, you were in trouble. That was be a severe beating, and you'd be swollen and bruised when you'd come back with this. Now again, being the son of teachers, We were treated a little bit different from the regular boys. Now, first of all, we never were caught if we could avoid it. But if we were caught, they would say, "Look, Payne, you better get home, boy." You know, something of this. Now, if I challenged them, that would have been different with that. So, a lot of my experiences that I'm talking about really is stuff that happened to my friends, a lot more so than actually happened to me.
And you were around the same age as Emmett Till whenever he was murdered in 1955. How did that affect you?
Well, Emmett Till and I were exactly the same age, and one of the ways that parents sometimes would control behavior is to frighten you with events that had happened. Now, as I said, Philadelphia was a sawmill town, and the mills owned shacks, houses for the workers to live in, and most of these were white workers that lived in these shacks. But and those row houses, as we would call them, were just started just across the street from my parents' house. Now, as kids, and these were poor white. As kids, we played together at times. Most time than not, they were over on our side playing, but we would play ball with them. And I used to raise rabbits, and there were some little girls little white girls over at the house, in the yard, and my rabbits had just had some babies, and the little girl was interested in how the rabbit have all those babies, and my mother heard that, and that scared my mother, and she came out and she told the little girl to go home, after this, and she said, "Ooh," she says, "you don't explain that." She says, "That's what happened to Emmett Till." She says, "That's what happened to you with little white girls." And now we had not talked about sex or anything of this, but when she heard the word babies, that's what came. And she was asking about the rabbits, but my mother just heard that, and I couldn't explain to her. Of course, I was only about 12. I didn't know what she was talking about either, and so but Emmett Till was used as, this is what happens when you look at white girls. Just look at white girls. Now Emmett Till was accused of making a woo whistle at this white girl. And so whenever you saw a white girl, you were afraid to look at them. You were afraid to even open your mouth or to do anything of this. So Emmett Till was used as a threat. This is what can happen to you.
And then how did you react to the events surrounding the Little Rock Nine?
The Little Rock Nine was I'm trying to put. I know where was I when I was in high school when that happened. Now with cable news, you get news 24 hours, so you can keep up with what's going on. But during this case, this time, you only got national news about 5 minutes in the afternoon, where the local radio stations, the local news, did not bring local news like that. They would not talk about it. So the only way you know what was going on is through the national news. And it was only about 5 or 6. It wasn't much. It was about 5 minutes that you would get. And so we thought that the Little Rock Nine, that once they got in school, now we could see the crowds that they had to go through, but we'd assumed that once they got in, that they were treated as if everything was okay. And it wasn't until I read a book, Warriors Don't Cry, that was written by one of the people who was in that, is that we were completely misled to believe that things went well for them inside the school once they got there. Many of us were. This was the first attempt at integrating the schools, and so the Little Rock Nine, they obviously were very bright kids because they were chosen chosen to go. Only the brightest ones would get chosen to go to that. And people would ask, would you do it if you were chosen? And the answer to it was yes. But now I was at Piney Woods, and so we felt as though we'd do it, and it wouldn't be any problems with that.
Did you feel a sense of community among other African American students in high school?
Yeah, that was when I grew up. Because of the situation, the social situation, and everything, I think there was a very strong sense of community. I think back now, in some instances, maybe too strong because you tended to support and protect things that maybe you shouldn't have. It's simply because we were accused of everything, nothing went right. Anyway, so you tended to defend people that probably were wrong, that probably had done things that they shouldn't, but they shouldn't have. So that was a very strong sense of community. Mm-hmm.
And then what did you do outside of school?
Worked. A lot of time work for me was doing what my dad and mom wanted me to do there. But I had a number of little jobs. One of the things I used to do was caddy. Go to the golf course, and that's how we made a lot of money. Now this was before the electric carts, and your shoulder served as the cart. And so we would go to the golf course in the afternoon after school. And if you caddied for 9 holes, I think you got 75 cents. 18 holes, you get $1, $1.50. And then if you do, it's called shagging balls. That's people practice. You go down range, and then they hit balls, and you would run chase them down. I think you got 50 cents. I think a bag. A bag would have about 25 balls in it. But when people would practice, the caddy, and most caddies were black. There was a stereotype that whites couldn't take the sun, so they didn't want a white caddy. They wanted the black caddy because the sun wasn't going to hurt us, And so they'd be up teeing, and they would line the ball up on you. They're trying to drop the ball on your head while you were there. And I would play baseball. When the ball would come, I'd reach out and catch them with this. And they didn't want you to catch them. They wanted it to roll so they could see how far it would go. And they would yell, "Gotta leave the ball alone." And I'd holler, "Yeah, okay." And soon as they hit it again, I'm like, "You think crazy as hell they think I'm going to run this ball down." And it's coming right by me, with this. The last 2 or 3 you'd let go because you had to take them up. They wouldn't remember that you'd been catching them when that when that happened. So caddying was a more common way that we made. I mowed yards. I had a lot of yards, not a lot, but several yards that I would mow. Now this was before gas mower. This is when you had to push. You had to push more. And one of the things I might add is that when we would go to the golf course, I lived about 4 or 5 miles from the golf course, and the town was between my house and the golf course, so you had to walk through town to get to the golf course. Now I could go around a town, which would be an extra couple of miles or so, or I could go through a couple of white communities and get there pretty quick. Now as a blackhead, you couldn't go through white communities unless you were going to work something. So one of the things that we would do is we had 2 or 3 old lawnmowers. Now you probably have never seen one of these lawnmowers, but you could turn them over and you could push them and just make them roll with it. And so what we used to do is have these lawnmowers, and we would hide them on different ends of the neighborhood, depending on where you were. And we would get that lawnmower and put it in front of you and push it when you go through the neighborhood, as if you were going to mow somebody's yard, and that to keep the police from stopping you when that happened. So mowing lawns was one way. Then also I sold popcorn at the theater. Now the theater was segregated. Blacks had to go to the balcony. Whites could go downstairs. And I could only sell popcorn to blacks. I had a popcorn machine over, but then I could only sell popcorn to white. But I had to clean up the help clean up basically clean up the theater, you know, with this. And it was always interesting. Blacks would be in the balcony and whites would be down. And I'd say white boys mostly, I think, would do that. They would get down low and they would throw stuff back up from down back to the balcony. And we used to think, now how dumb is this? Because whatever they threw up, we could see it coming, you know, so you could catch it and get out of the way of it. But on the other hand, we could dump stuff over on them and they didn't see it coming when it was there. And so we would take stuff in, you know, and bags of sand and stuff and just throw it over, you know. And of course, the louder they holler, the more you know you got one, you know. and we never could figure out why would they go down there and throw stuff back up? Like, it just don't make any sense. When it was just too easy for us to dump stuff or just throw stuff right over.
So, other than watching movies, like what kind of things did you do just for fun, other than like working and stuff?
Well, we played ball all day long. Football, basketball, baseball, those three. When you finish your work, most of the time, and most of us had things that we had to do early in the morning and late in the afternoon. And in between, it was not either these little jobs, and we go over. The schoolhouse was kind of where we went to school was kind of in the center of the community, and there was and there was no gym, so the basketball goals and everything was outside. The football field, baseball, everything was there, and so it was kind of like a park. It was just open there, and what we did mostly was play ball all day long. We had our own track and field. We'd run and jump. That's kind of how we entertain ourselves.
All right. Mm-hmm. And what else do you remember about the civil rights movement during your high school years?
I remember our teachers. Now again, I was at Pinewoods, and so it was a little different from a regular school. And we were constantly told that you're going to have to compete against white kids. You have to do this, do that. And so it was always that backdrop of being prepared to compete against whites. I always wanted to go to medical school, and people would say, well, you can do it. But then when I think back at that, yeah, I could have, but at that time, there were very few black doctors in Mississippi, and they were only in cities. I never saw a black doctor while growing up. And to become a lawyer during that time, I think it was illegal for black to practice law in the state of Mississippi. And so a lot of those kinds of things just didn't make sense. But yet we were encouraged. Teaching was the primary job that black people looked forward to. Where I went to college, the joke would be, which one of the ERS, E-R-S, which one of the ERS are you going to be, teacher or preacher? Those were about the only two things that you could really look forward to doing. Now, one of the things that a lot of people are unaware of is that if you graduated from one of the black colleges, and in Mississippi, that was Jackson State, Alcorn, Tougaloo, Rusk College, am I leaving out, Mississippi Valley State. There were like 6 or 7 black schools just in the state of Mississippi. And in most of the southern states, there were most of the black colleges are in the South. Now, so in the South, there was higher ed in the black colleges. But most of them were not professional schools. You didn't, graduate school, there was no master's or doctorate degree. However, that was what was called out-of-state aid, which meant that if you could go to IU and get accepted as a black person, the state of Mississippi would pay your tuition for you. They'd rather do that than have you go to Ole Miss or Mississippi State, one of those. I was at the University of Virginia, and while I was at the University of Virginia, Mississippi, state of Mississippi, paid a good bit of my tuition. And I said a good bit because what happened, I was at Virginia in the late 60s, and blacks are now going to Ole Miss and Mississippi State. And I kept thinking, boy, how long are they going to keep paying me not to go to these schools? And so my last year at UVA, I was working on my doctorate. And usually when they would send me my application and my papers, it would come in a big envelope. But this time it came the letter came in a little envelope, and I said, this can't be good. And so as I opened it, they told me that the state of Mississippi would no longer pay your tuition, that my transcript and everything. Because whenever I would apply, I'd have to send them my grades. So they had my grades and everything. They said, you have already been accepted to either one of the programs, Mississippi State or Ole Miss, and you can transfer back to those. So at that time, I'm this close to graduating from UVA, so why should I? And I said, doggone, I got to pay my own money now to go to school. So there were quite a few African American friends. If you went to medical school, they paid tuition. Now you'd have to pay your own room and board, but they would pay tuition. So that's how really quite a few blacks in the South got professional degrees from up north, because Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, Arkansas, Louisiana, those states would pay black people to go out of the state as opposed to letting them attend the schools there.
So James Meredith was the first black student to go to the University of Mississippi, and that sparked a lot of riots and stuff. Do you remember any of those?
Oh yeah, I remember the night that James Meredith went into to Ole Miss. I had graduated a year before from Rust College, which is in Holly Springs, Mississippi, which is about 30 miles from Oxford, which is where Ole Miss. Yeah. Now James Meredith went in on a Sunday afternoon, or Sunday evening, late Sunday evening, and I had been back to Rust to visit some friends of mine. I didn't have a car; I was riding a bus, and on the radio you could hear that the James Meredith was on campus. The FBI had to take him to registration, and there was great protests, and all those little towns were up in uproar. The Klan was marching, people were flying the rebel flag and all this, and so as I got on the bus in Holly Springs, even then, I guess it was the Klan, but you could see people protesting with the flags and burning stuff. I was riding a bus, and we went into New Albany, Mississippi, which is one of the little towns over from Oxford. I noticed that there were two cars trailing the bus. And I was the only person on the bus, period, other than the bus driver. And when we pulled into the bus station, these two cars came in behind, and the bus driver got up and he looked back at me, didn't say anything. Now again, I was in the back of the bus because that's where I had to ride at that time. And as he got off the bus, I heard him lock the door. And I said, whoa, he's either locking me in or them out. I'm not sure which one. Now buses are up high, so people can't really see over in them. Plus they had tinted windows. And so I could lean down in my seat and I could look out the window. And as he was going toward the bus station, the building, the two guys, they went up to him, and I saw him shake his head like this. And I could only imagine that they were asking him if there were any blacks on the bus. And he said no at that time. And so it took me another couple of hours to get home. And as I got off the bus, I just kind of looked at him and he looked at me. We could not say anything to each other. I couldn't say thank you. I couldn't shake his hand or anything. But he had probably, I don't know what he'd say, but he probably had saved me from a severe beating, if nothing else. And he took his own life in his hand, because if they had found me on that bus with him telling him I wasn't on that, he would have been in a lot of trouble when he did that. So yeah, I remember very well when Jane Meredith went into Ole Miss.
All right. And so the first president of Rusk College, Reverend A.C. McDonald, stated that the purpose of Rusk College was to lay well a foundation for a broad, thorough, and practical education, such as shall fit our pupils for long lives of usefulness to themselves, their race, and the church. Do you think this goal was successful?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so. Rust was a church school, Methodist school with this, and at that time was probably looked at as one of the more academic of the black schools. With that, Tougaloo, I don't know if you found it, but Tougaloo was a sister school which was in Jackson. Tougaloo probably had the best reputation of that, and from Rust, if you wanted to go to med school, or if you wanted to go to into the law school, Rust would be one of the schools that you would have gone to. Now, what happened to me in med school is that I applied to Meharry Medical School. Now, Meharry is a black medical school in Nashville, Tennessee, and it was also one of there were 13 Methodist schools. Meharry was a professional school in those 13. And so I only applied to Meharry because I knew I was going to get in there, because everybody else from Russ that I know had gotten in. The year that I applied was the year the American Medical Association told Meharry, you have to stop taking students from unaccredited schools. You have to start taking schools from, and Russ was unaccredited. And the only way that they could take me was that all of the people that they had accepted had turned down, and I was on a waiting list, and then I could be accepted. Now, in the meantime, I had scored high enough on the MCAT. I don't know if it's called MCAT then, but the medical aptitude test. I scored high enough that I got a letter from two schools, the University of Illinois, one of them, and Western Michigan was another one, telling me that my scores were high enough that they would be willing to consider me on probation, because I was coming from an unaccredited school. And so they encouraged me maybe to make an application. Now, the day I got the letter from the dean, we didn't have emails then and cell phones, so it had to come hardbound. The day I got the letter was the day that the application was due. And I went to my advisor, and he said, "Oh man," he said, "boy, why couldn't this have been 2 days ago? We could have gotten this in." So I felt sorry for myself, and I went and got my friends, and we went and started drinking beer, and bemoaning the fact that I couldn't get in. And I often think now, in terms of kids getting good advice, what would have happened had somebody said, "Pick up the telephone and call and tell them you just got the letter. Could they give you a couple of days to get the application in?" What a difference that might have made in my life. So good information is key for people with that. So yeah, I thought Russ did pretty well with that. Quite a few of the ministers, at least at that time, in the Methodist Church, Black Methodist Church, like AME, African Methodist, quite a few of them went to schools like Ross, and so they were college grads. So I think maybe it reached its goal. Yeah. Now Ross, like a lot of other private schools, particularly black private schools, fell on hard times after, and when the federal government, states began to put more money into public schools, a lot of private schools began to suffer.
So how did you handle the transition to college life?
As I said, I had been in Piney Woods, and so I had been accustomed to being away from home. I had been accustomed to having to study on my own. I did not find college life academically to be that big of a problem. Now, Piney Woods, we were pretty well controlled in terms of dating. The girls, we had girls there, but we could only talk to them like about a half hour a day, sort of thing like that. Socially, I had to make some adjustments to that. I wasn't used to being that free, with this, and so my first quarter there. Well, I won't tell you my grades, but I knew that if I didn't improve, I wasn't going to be that much longer. Then and my dad, I have to give him credit. He says, I hope you learn your lesson. And that, we kind of laughed. He said, you're a much better student than this, and I know that. He said, but if you don't study, if you don't go to class, he said, you can't live up to your potential. He said, take everything over again. And I did well from there. So academically it wasn't that big of a, but socially I had to make some adjustments to that. Yeah.
What kind of things were you involved in on campus?
I was class president for my freshman year and my sophomore year. I was involved in the student in student government. And just a number of clubs, science club, a number of things like this. Now, Russ was a small school, only like 500 students, so it didn't have the number of things like you would have here at Ball State to get involved. But I was most of the organization. We had what's called the MSM, which stands for the Methodist Student MSM, the Methodist Student Movement, which was was an activity on Sunday afternoon, religious based, where we'd go over and play games and do songs and different things of this. But just social in the student government, class leaders, different things of that.
Were you involved in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee?
So I was in school I graduated in '62. Mm-hmm. Those organizations, SNCC and all of those, really were kind of like later, kind of like after, mm-hmm. after that. I was involved at Ross. We sitting in the theater, in the theater, and a couple of other things. But a lot of the Freedom Riders, a lot of that was after I was in college.
Okay. So you graduated from Rust with a degree in chemistry, correct?
Right.
At that point, were you still on track to become a doctor?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. As I said, I was put on the waiting list. And I got a teaching job at home. And surprisingly, I enjoyed teaching, and I was doing well. I mean, I had a passion for working with kids. And in Philadelphia, the area is a high poverty area, and I had a passion for working with kids in poverty, and I was doing well with them. So I kind of enjoyed it. Now, when Harry did say, "Hey, we can take you," there's a spot for you. I had gotten married for the first time and had a son, a child on the way then, and so I couldn't really quit and go back to med school. And so I just continued teaching. I got a National Science Foundation scholarship to go to Tuskegee, and then I went there during the summer. And while I was there, I was offered an academic year and just to stay and work on my master's, and I did that. And then when I got back to home, I was there, I think, a half a year, and then I was offered a chemistry position at Mississippi Valley State College with that. And so that's how I didn't get back to med school. I enjoyed teaching. I really don't regret. It's a story I tell, but I really don't regret it. I've enjoyed what I've done other than that. Yeah.
That's good. So then, how long was it? after you graduated from Rust that you went to Tuskegee?
The following year, I graduated from Rust, I think in August is when I started teaching. The following year, I started Tuskegee that following summer. I started at Tuskegee because, well, I don't know if you looked up the history of the National Science Foundation, but, you know, National Science Foundation was an attempt for Americans to create more scientists because we had gotten behind Russia, you know, so the science teacher. But going to summer school is also a nice way that science teachers can make extra money because you got paid to go back, you know. But besides from that, I wanted to be the very best teacher for my students that I could possibly be, and so I went back because of that.
And then Tuskegee has a very rich history from like the Tuskegee Airmen, and the university was actually founded by Booker T. Washington.
Right.
So did that impact your decision to go there at all?
Not really. I went there because I was accepted. I was accepted to like 2 or 3 places on the National Science Foundation, and Tuskegee was the closest to me. And University of Oklahoma was one, and I'd never been that far from home in my life, you know. And so partly to go to Tuskegee because at that time Tuskegee, and it still is, a very prestigious school among African Americans, you know. So, and I'd been there to visit because I'd never been there as a student, and so that was partly to go there as the prestige of having gone. Said I had gone there.
And what was it like there?
Oh, it was fun. It was very academic. A lot of the professors, I never had that many professors who all had PhDs. Quite demanding, quite challenging. That was the VA hospital that was in Tuskegee. You have to keep in mind in Tuskegee, there were actually 2 Tuskegees. There's Tuskegee Institute, which is where the school is, and then there's another Tuskegee that's around it. And when we were there, they called it Black Tuskegee versus White Tuskegee. So there was White Tuskegee as well. There was also a VA hospital that was there. And I don't know if you've heard of the syphilis studies that was done in Alabama. That's where it was done. It was done in that hospital that was there. And there were black medical doctors there. And so I saw professional people, professional black, that I had never seen before. Professional electricians, professional engineers. They also had a veterinarian school that was there. So I saw a lot of professional people that I'd never seen before. Now, I have to tell you, this is kind of a joke. When we were at Tuskegee, we knew nothing about the Tuskegee Airmen. That our field where they practiced was out there, but we didn't know why it was there. It was a good place to go out and sit and drink beer. You know, now, I was back with my son, who was in Birmingham at the hospital there, and we went back last summer with this. Now it's a museum, and it's really nice, very well done, very, very nice. And all I could do was just kind of like laugh. With the thing when I was there, we had no clue.
Were you involved in any sort of like civil rights protests or things while you were there?
The Selma to Montgomery march happened while I was there. I was not in the march itself, but when they finally got to Montgomery, there were a lot of people that went to meet them. I was one of those. I can't say I was that involved. I was not in the actual march itself, only as part of the, yay, y'all made it.
What was the overall atmosphere like?
Oh, it was exhilarating, sense of sense of accomplishment. And then also there was a sense of fright too, a sense of what's going to happen as a result of this, particularly as you try to drive home, these sort of things. So it was exhilarating. It was a sense of accomplishment, that it happened. And also sadness because you could hear of things that had happened, to people on the way over, on the bridge and things.
Did you notice any immediate impact of President Johnson's Civil Rights Act of 1964?
There were some, but begrudgingly, there were some, for instance, businesses that would initially refuse to serve you, had to suddenly start serving you, even though they didn't want to. They may be hostile towards you, angry towards you. Motels had to suddenly start letting you, rent a room from them. All those things was almost very instant happen. There were people who refused to do it. I remember I was going from Mississippi to Atlanta, and there was a place, it was called Mayhew Junction, Mississippi. And I had been through Mayhew Junction several times. There was a truck stop there. You get gas, but there was also a cafe. We get sandwiches down. The black person, I couldn't go in that cafe. No matter how good the hamburger smelled, you couldn't go in there and get one of them. So I stopped at the service station to gas up. And it occurred to me, hey, wait a minute, I can go in and get me a hamburger now. And so I went in, and as I walked in, the guy behind the counter, said, he called me and he said, what do you want? And I said, I'd like to get a hamburger with this. He says, you can't get a hamburger here. And I said, the law said, that's changed. Civil rights law says I can't come in here. He said, that's civil rights law in Washington, D.C., you in Mayhew Junction, Mississippi. And there was a glass counter in front of him. And as he was talking, I happened to look down, and he had a double-barrel shotgun in that counter that was pointed right at me. And all I could do was say, yeah, you're right. and backed out. I didn't get my hamburger, with that. So on the one hand, there were places that tried to respond instantly. There were some that did it very begrudgingly. There were a lot of them that went out of business before they would do it. So yeah, that was pretty quick on the surface, but beneath it there was a lot of anger.
So why did you go into science education?
Well, as I said, I wanted to go into medicine, and when I became a teacher, to get a master's degree in education, because I enjoyed teaching. That's what I wanted to do. So I switched from what people say the peer, applied to education, because that's where I wanted to be. I enjoyed science as well, but I wanted to be a science teacher. Integration happened so quick. The first year I started teaching, I had no clue that integration was as close as it was. So I had seen myself as working with black kids, working with poverty, and I enjoyed working with those kinds of. This is where I had said, hey, this is where I'm going to be. I was at home, this is where I'm probably going to be for the rest of my life, is doing this.
Mm-hmm. When did you meet your wife?
My second wife.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Sorry.
I got divorced in '65, and I was teaching at Mississippi Valley State College. And then I went to graduate school at the University of Virginia, and I met my wife then, 1970, there as a graduate student. And I guess many relationships, it was more of an accident. She was in the apartment complex where I lived with a fella, not with him, but she and some friends. They had been to a wedding because they got away. And the wedding party was at this friend's apartment that was a couple of doors over from me. And I heard the noise, and everything. So I decided to go over and see what they were doing, and I went over, and that's where I met her. And probably what kept the relationship going. Her last name was Payne, also spelled the same way, you know. And I said, well, boy, this is. I said, so we got to get together, and you know, and pursue this name a little bit further with this. And so she kind of laughed. She said, yeah, you know. So she told her, I think she told her dad that she met me in Payne. And of course her dad was interested too. They were, well, where's his people? Who are his people? I said, well, look, I got to meet your dad. Well, anyway, it just started from that. Yeah.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
So you said you met her while you were at University of Virginia.
Right.
What made you want to go to University of Virginia?
One, it was known as a good school, and I can't think. I had a friend maybe that suggested that I might want to go. Particularly had a top science ed program. At that time, I think Harvard had the #1 science ed program. Virginia was #2. I think Ohio State was #3. And with this, I didn't quite convince myself that I wanted to try to go to Harvard, but I thought maybe at UVA I would try that, you know. And so I liked what I heard about the university, its programs, and all that. And not only that, it was friendly toward African Americans as well. I remember I'm right on the edge of when African Americans were beginning to go to schools like that. Mm-hmm.
In recent years, only about 6% of students that go to University of Virginia are African American. What were the demographics like when you went there?
You know, I can't really give you very specific numbers. There were very few of us in graduate school. The law school, it seems to me, the law school may have had a higher percentage of African Americans than any of the professional school. I'm not sure how many was in the medical school at that time. The undergrads, there seemed to have been a few more. As a graduate student, I didn't know a lot of the undergrads. There seemed to have been a lot more undergrads, maybe, than the percentage of the percentage of graduate students. We were really pretty small at that time. Mm-hmm.
What was it like transitioning from a black college to being the minority at the school?
One of the biggest problems I had was, I went from the deep South to, well, it depends. Virginians don't like to be called Southerners. So I went from the bottom of the South to the top of the South. And so one of the bigger problems I had was dialect, language. That I had to really work, because up to this point, I had been mostly in African American communities, African American schools and things where I could speak the black dialect or what have you, and everything, and even writing with that. So the biggest problem I had to overcome was really dialect and communication, using phrases that my white colleagues didn't understand or didn't know what I was talking about with this. So that was the biggest part, biggest adjustment for me.
How was the school itself different from the other schools that you had went to?
I really didn't find it that big of a difference there, because a lot of the professors I had at Tuskegee, and many of them had gone to University of Michigan, some of them Ivy League school, and so they were quite demanding themselves, you know, with that. So the demand. Plus, I can say that I've always been a pretty hard worker, and so working hard, reading a lot, really didn't bother me to have to do that. As a matter of fact, I was happy to do it because it felt like it had meaning to it, as opposed to just doing it on my own. I'm not expected to to do this. So
Did you face any sort of discrimination while you were there?
no, I can say I honestly didn't.
Were there, what do you remember about when Martin Luther King was assassinated?
Oh, I was teaching at Mississippi Valley State College during that time, and we had a bowling league, and I was at the league. I was bowling, and it came over the public system that he had been shot, and you know the expression, you could hear a feather fall. I mean, people just slumped and went down when that happened. With that, and then it came out later on that he had died from that, and then protest. People angry began. One kid threw a bowling ball through the glass. Was there, and so we were saying, what good is this going to do? It's not going to bring him back. You know, whoever did this is not going to hurt. So we had to really work with the students to keep them from tearing up. Out of anger, you know, and out of protest, and that was a lot of concern. Who's going to be the leader? What are we going to do? Now with this? So that was great concern.
Okay, so you earned your doctorate in science education. How has your college education impacted your life?
You know, I hear people ask the question now, is it too expensive to go to college? And I'm saying, boy, be careful how you answer that question. The answer is no. I'm a firm believer that education is what makes the difference in your life. Without an education, again, I've told people, you know, I don't think Ball State hired me because I was black. Because I think they hired me because I had an education, because I had a doctorate degree, you know, in terms of that. So I think that that education itself has made the world of difference for me.
Did you begin working at Ball State immediately after you graduated?
From University of Virginia?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was my first job. First and only job, actually,
Mm-hmm.
after I left that. Again, I was in science education. Now, multicultural education, this is what I did at Ball when I came. That's what I was hired to do. So that was a new concept. People had no clue as to what that was. And I remember with a friend, we were getting ready to graduate, and we both were in science ed, and we were over at the placement center looking at positions on the bulletin board, and I was looking at, but he said, "What do you do?" He said, "What do you find so interesting?" That I said, "Ball State University wants somebody to start and develop a multicultural program." He just broke out laughing. He said, "Man, you don't know anything about multicultural education." And I said, "They don't either." Because I knew that was a new term, that I had just seen that. And plus, I had a relative from Gary who had gone to Ball State. So I knew Ball State a little bit in terms of a teacher ed school. And I was interested in teacher education with that. So that's what led me to apply here.
Mm-hmm. So what was your actual position when you started here?
I was an assistant professor in the Department of Adult, Higher, and Community Ed. They've changed the name since then. But I was also director of a multicultural program in secondary ed, which was a brand new program at that time. So I was hired specifically to develop that program, start that program.
Okay. And how would you describe the culture of Ball State when you started working here?
You know, I think there are two ways when you hired at a place like there's the institution itself, and then there are the people within the institution themselves. Uh, the institution itself was acceptable. I think there were efforts. There were people who thought that I was only hired because the federal government made Ball State hire me. And so there was some rejection of me based on that. They thought I had been forced on them. But the people within the department, particularly my department chair at that time, made the difference for me in terms of my feeling welcome and wanting to be here. You know, either as an example, the first class that I had, it would end at about 9:50, you know, and which is different. Now times were ended differently, but as I would leave my classroom, there were always two fellas that were just going to get a cup of coffee, and wanted to know if I wanted to go with them. And sometime I would, sometime I wouldn't. But I said, boy, it's always interesting how they can be in the same spot, almost look like daily when I go out. And so finally, two of my white students in my class told me, two fellas said, we want to talk to you. He said, you know, there are two white guys that keep asking us about you. Do you know what you're doing? Do you know what you? And I described them, and they said, yeah. I said, okay, I know who that is, you know. So it came, I finally put it together. I said, they're standing outside the door listening to me teach. That's why they're in the same spot all the time when I leave. And so the next day I went to class, I left the door open deliberately. And then as I started having class, I was talking and I went over as if I was looking for something to close the door. And as I reached out to get the door, I looked and there they were standing there listening with that. And so I knew then, I said, well, they're listening to me. So I have a choice. I can either get mad and go out and yell at them and all of this, or as I said, look, stand on out there, you may learn something. So rather than get angry with them, I just say, hey, here's my opportunity, you know, to prove that I'm not teaching white kids to be disrespectful. And so I was teaching multicultural, which was new. People didn't know what they were. They thought I was trying to make radicals out of people. They were afraid that I was going to have protests on campus and just all kinds of things that were going on with this. Now, about 4 or 5 years later, one of the two guys that were actually having coffee, we were talking, and he was acknowledging his concern when I first came about me. And I said, well, how long? I said, when did you change your opinion about this? And he said, you know, after 4 or 5 years, I just kept listening to you're talking, and he said, I didn't see where you were making any mistakes or anything with this, and I didn't say anything. And I said, after 5 years? He said, yeah. He never picked up, and I'm thinking, damn, 5 years? That boy, I tell you, that's a long time for a person to have to walk the line for you to finally decide that they're okay. You know, with it. So the institution itself had some problem with that, but there were good people. There were some good people here, and that's what I learned to look for. We'll look for the people that wanted me here, that wanted to help me advance what I wanted to do. And I just kind of avoided or stayed away from the people that were kind of in the way.
So those two guys who were listening, were they other faculty members, or were
they were faculty members. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Now I may add too is that both of them really became very good friends. They got to know me, and this is you know, part of the learning is what happens when people get to know each other. They knew nothing about black people. They knew no black person before. All they knew was what they had heard, and they were assuming that the federal government had made Ball State hire me. And they weren't the only one. There were a lot of people who thought that there was a rumor that I was being paid more than other professors. But as a result of that, there were some professors who didn't want to cooperate with me because, well, he'd been paid more, let him work harder, than other than that. There was a professor in one of the other departments in TC who called me one day, and it was a woman. She said, I'd like to have lunch with you if you don't mind. I said, no, I don't. Until we had lunch. She said, I wanted to tell you, she said, when you were hired to start the multicultural program, she said, I was really happy and wanted you to do this. She said, but I had heard that you were being paid more than the rest of us. She said, I decided I wasn't going to help you with this. I said, so what changed your mind? She said, she kept saying, my conscience kept bothering me. Like I should be helping him. I should do what I can to help him. And she said, well, okay, suppose he is making more than the rest of us. How much more is he making? Now, you can find any professor's salary you want to if you want to go to the trouble to do it. And I think at that time, they kept professor salaries in the president's office. And she went over and asked to see the list of salary. And what she found out is that I was making less than most professors. Because at that time, Ball State had a salary schedule. And depending on your experience, that's what you got. But in other words, I was not paid any more than anybody else who came in with that. So, she saw that, and she began to try to put that out, that I wasn't being paid more than other people.
We learned a lot about the Ball State's salary schedule and how that's changed over the years.
Yeah.
Have you always seen that as sort of a fair deal?
You mean changing that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Even though I've even going from the salary system to the merit system, even though I've had some questions about the merit system with this, I thought we were getting more like other universities and things with this. So I wasn't that. And again, I had said that if it's a fair system, I'll do okay. That was my belief. Now, if it's a political system, if it's based on something else, I may not do too well. But if it's a matter of competition, doing my work, doing a good job, teaching my classes, doing that, I don't have any problem with. I don't have any problem with that. So I really wasn't that worried about it.
Okay. So when you started here, the multicultural education program was fairly new. How did you help shape the goals of the program?
I had to insist that this was a program about multicultural groups, not just African Americans. I fell out with a lot of the few African Americans here. I fell out with a good many of them because that was what they wanted it to be. They thought it would be a black program. I said, no, we have a Black History program in the history department. I said, this is multicultural education. This is not black education. It includes black education, but I just had to insist that this is what it's about. I also had to insist that that multicultural education is about how you teach people. So I had a strong emphasis on teaching strategies, on content, inclusion of people within what we teach. It just wasn't a series of stories. It wasn't just history. History is important, but it had to be beyond. So it became an application of that. But I think my insistence that the two things. One is it's not an African American program, and it's also not an inner city program. So that was my biggest struggle, is getting people away from those two concepts. Is that multicultural education is about upper income people as much as it is about lower income. Because as teachers, you need to understand all of those different groups, and in particular, what happens when you bring them together. So I think that was the biggest. That was the biggest struggle. And being African American, a lot of people didn't believe me when I would say this is about other groups as well. And I'd have students say, but we've had your class, but it seems that when you talked about African American, you were more excited. And I said, well, I didn't mean to. I said, but I've been African American all my life. That's a group I know. And so I may talk about them with a lot more confidence than I do about other guys. So when I talk about African American, my culture, I know that, and I do have a lot more confidence sometimes in that than perhaps I do in some of the other cultures.
So when you started working here, did you expect to work here for as long as you did?
Growing up and watching my dad and other people, doing a good job means you stayed with it for a long time. So on the one hand, I thought that if I do a good job, maybe I'll be here for a while. But that never really came into my mind because I was more concerned about doing a good job than leaving. Now there were times though, after I had been here for a while, I kept thinking, maybe I missed the boat. Maybe I should have looked around for some other things to do. But no, my wife says now she can't believe we're still here. So I never really questioned how long I was going to be here. I just tried to do my job. Now I have to admit, my first quarter here, when I came, I was given a program that had been approved by the University Senate, and it said that I could start the multicultural program in the spring quarter. We were on a quarter system then, and so I had 2 quarters to get students to volunteer for the program. And I was being told by professors that, boy, you're going to have a hard time getting students that want to be in your multicultural program because we don't get a lot of students from Gary and a lot of the urban students. And most of our students are white, and they come from places like Ligonier, Wawasee, and all these places, and they're not going to be interested in the multicultural program. So I got a little concerned. I told my wife, I said, people are telling me I can't start this program here. And she says, so what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'm kind of hung here for the next 9 months anyway. And I said, I got to make this look good for 9 months. I said, because when you start looking for another job, the people aren't going to ask you how bad was the job. What they're going to ask you is how well did you do on it. They don't want to know how bad it was. But I said, so I got to make this look good for a while. So I decided to stop talking to professors about starting the multicultural because they weren't going to be in it anyway. Over in the student center now, there was, I don't know what they call it now, but it used to be called a tally ho. Mm-hmm. And so students would go there and they'd play cards and do different stuff. Now at that time, believe it or not, I was a lot younger than I am now. So I would go in and I would play cards with them. And a lot of them thought I was a student, And then as I would get to know them, I'd ask them about what were they majoring in. And at that time, quite a few of them were teacher ed majors. And I would tell them about, multicultural ed, and I'm starting this new program. I said, so why don't you come over and, John, why don't you come over and hear me talk about it and explain it. So I would go to Tally Ho, I would go over to La Follette. La Follette also had a commons area. I'd go over and I'd talk to students there. And so then I'd start putting up posters that I wanted to meet about the multicultural program. Now this was the first quarter I was here. And by mid-quarter, I had enough students that they were ready to join the program. I had about 35 students who were ready to sign up right then, ready to go. And so I was able to start the program. The second quarter I was here rather than the third quarter I was here. Most of the students were from Ligonier, Wawasee, all of the places that people said that they wouldn't be interested. That's where they were. That's where they were they were from, you know. And at that time, it was a little bit more difficult actually to attract some of the African American students, but the few that were here, because they were assuming that this program is about African American, and why do I need to know about African American? So I had to work a little harder to get actually some minority students in the program than I did the white students.
And did the university help you advertise and sort of get students interested in?
Oh yeah, yeah. The university, this is what I'm saying. People made the difference. The dean, the department chair, Burkhardt Building. Dr. Burkhardt was the provost at the time that I was here. Now there is a policy. I still think it's a policy, and I don't know what the number, but then, in order to have a class, for a class to go, you had to have at least 10 students in it. I don't know what it is now. But as I started the program, some people were freshmen, some were sophomores, different people. And I had a junior year class that I needed to offer, but I only had 8 students who were juniors to go into that class. And so I didn't quite have enough to make a class. So I went to the department chair and told him, I said, look, if I don't offer this class and people are going through it, if they find out that they get to this point and they have to stop, they can't. I said, it's not going to help me. And so he said, yeah, you're right. So he called the dean. He said, I can't approve that. So he called the dean, told the dean about it, and the dean said, yep, you're right. And he said, I can't approve it either, so you got to go talk to Dr. Burkhardt. Well, they call him Rich, so you got to go call to Dr. Rich. And people were afraid of Dr. Burkhardt for some reason. And his secretary, I thought he was going to come over and talk to him, but his secretary called and made an appointment for me to come talk to him. So I said, okay. So I went over and I told him the situation. And he looked at me and he said, Charles, he said, we hired you here to start this program. He said, if we didn't intend to help you, we shouldn't have hired you. And he picked up the phone and called the secretary and said, call the dean and tell him to let Charles have his course. And then I found out why people were afraid of him. His voice changed. And he said, and tell him, don't give Charles whatever he needs and don't call me over here anymore about this. When I got back to the building, I walked from the ad building to TC. When I got back to the building, the word had already gotten there. And Dr. Burkhardt said, get Charlie whatever he wants. and so, yeah, the institution helped me quite a bit to do whatever. And that's why I'm saying the people made the difference. The institution may not have, but the people, there were good people along the way that helped.
So how has the university changed in the 41 years that you worked here?
Oh, physically and student-wise. When I came, the diversity, multiculturalism, nothing. I suspect there are very few people, very few places, very few programs on this campus where diversity isn't an issue. I don't mean a bad issue, but a concept that people try to study, people try to bring in with this. Trying to recruit minority faculty, minority students, all this is big time business. It's hard because everybody in the country trying to do the same thing. So I think the attitude on the part of a lot of people has changed quite a bit. I think the community itself has become a lot more open to it. When I came, believe it or not, there were still apartments, and we'd had nearly the number of apartments then that you have now. There were still apartments in places where black people couldn't live, couldn't rent. There were some organizations where black people could not go into. I remember the Elks Club. I don't know, are you from Muncie? There's an Elks Club outside here, and my department chair, this was the first year I was here, the department had a retreat. At this, a retreat, it was a Sunday afternoon dinner, really out together with this. And as my wife and I approached the door, I saw this guy come up to the door and do something to it, but I really wasn't sure what he did. And as I got to the door, I tried to open it, and it was locked. And then I kept with the door trying to open it, and as I was opening it, he closed it. I'd opened it, and he closed it. And finally, my department chair saw us. He didn't quite know what was going on, but he saw it. And he came up and he asked the guy, said, "What's wrong?" He says, "He's with us." He said, he can come in. And he said, "No, he can't. Not in here, he can't." And the department chair said, "Well, if he can't come in, the rest of us are leaving." And that changed that, right? So you wouldn't find that here now. They may not want you, but at least they would be there pulling the door. Back and forth. So it's changed quite a bit with this. A number of professors now try to do diversity-related things in that class. As you look at Code Red, I don't know if you go to athletics now, but you look at Code Red, the cheerleaders and all that, you see not totally diverse, but you see a diverse group there. One year that I was here, for a couple of years I was here, there was a protest from the white girls that they wanted someone else to be cheerleaders other than blondes. So there weren't even brunettes that were, which is something I had not noticed, until one of the students was telling me about that. So a lot of things like that have changed.
Okay. So tell me about your experience with the Office of Institutional Diversity. When did that come about?
Well, that really is recent. Dr. King, Terry King, who's the provost now, when he came, he put together, and that was one of his first or second questions when he came, was about diversity. And at that time, I was in, it was called, I changed the name on it, I forgot the old name, the Office of Diversity or something like this, and he wanted to know what was that about. So he had an interest when he first came. So he put together a committee, and he asked several questions, and he said, "Now, give me about 3 or 4 things that I can do on this campus to make a difference." And one of them was to appoint an assistant provost for diversity, and then also an office of institute. Well, it was an office, I can't think of the name, the diversity, and I named it Institution of Diversity, but he did. So it actually came out of his office that this was happening. And so the whole idea behind the Office of Institution of Diversity, as I had it now, there's a different director who may have a different perception of that. But as I saw it, my job was to encourage people to do diversity, to assist in recruitment of faculty and this. But more than anything was to try to coordinate all of the things that by now, and see, we're like 25 years or 30 years later. Now, there are a lot of programs, there are a lot of things in diversity that are going on, but they were disjointed from each other. So one of the things I tried to do in the Institute was to try to bring things together. Sometimes they were duplicating what they were doing and working together. So that's what I saw is my big task was trying to do that. And to encourage the institution to do things. For instance, the Martin Luther King Memorial concert, was an idea of mine because I was listening to it was during the Martin Luther King Day. I was listening to the radio, and there was a program out of Atlanta that I was listening to where the Morehouse Choir, which is a black school, and Spelman Choir, had a tribute to Martin Luther King there. And the schools and the bands and choirs had come together, and I said, "Gee, I really like that." And I said, "Ball State University, why can't we do that?" And so that's where the idea of the memorial concert came. Now the School of Music so it's a little bit different from what I had hoped that it would be, but it's still good. They still have it. Yeah.
And when did you like suggest that idea?
Probably 7, 8 years ago. It's yeah.
Okay, so, in terms of your career at Ball State, what accomplishment are you most proud of?
I think just the overall impact that I think I was able to do here in terms of getting people to see multicultural ed, diversity as a positive thing and not as a negative thing. I think to me it's unfortunate that when people hear diversity, they immediately think conflict. Now you can make it conflict if you want to, but if you talk about racism, prejudice, that's only a small part of what diversity is all about. Diversity is what makes us human and all that. And I think they can be fun to talk about those differences and as opposed to conflicting with each other. And so I hope that I've left people with a positive attitude toward what it is, as opposed to the fact that it always has to be conflict, that people always have to be at each other's throat about what's going to happen, and people are always being threatened with it. I just hope that is an attitude that I've left here.
And then what does your family think about the legacy that you left?
They're quite proud. They're proud, proud of it. My son, as I mentioned, is in medicine, but he's also done some things in med school where he is there related to diversity. He put together a kind of a recruiting program. I think he said they had the highest number of minority to come into recruiting to do their internship. Residents had the highest percentage of minority that they'd ever had with this. And so he's interested. He wants to become academic medicine, where he wants to work in a med school, you know. And I think he'd like to do something related to minority, to diversity with that. My daughter in working with foster care, you know, is constantly talking about diversity, because it used to be at one time that you couldn't place minority students with white families and vice versa, but now that's not. So she's constantly in her group talking about different groups with this. And my wife, in the director of the counseling, has started several diversity teams in counseling. They do quite a bit in diversity with this. So I think they've been quite supportive of it. Mm-hmm.
What changes do you expect is in the future of Ball State?
I don't know. A lot of universities are going through great change, you know, with different things. I had hoped, and I had this vision 40 years ago when I came here, that diversity, or that the idea of diversity would just become a natural part of what we do, and that maybe you don't have to talk about it. People just do it with this. And I hope that one of these days they can get to that point. Now, sometimes I think we expect things to happen probably too quick. We want it to happen in our lifetime, and I don't think it will. I tell my class that what we enjoy today is what somebody else wanted years ago. So what we would like to have today, we have to make that possible for somebody else in the future. So I think in the future then, as we begin to get more minorities in administrative positions, more minorities with PhD, that's going to take time in order to be able to do that. So sometimes I think we start asking questions in terms of social change probably too quick. If people ask me, have we reached the Martin Luther King dream? And I said, I don't know. Maybe it's too soon to ask that question. I certainly think we're on our way there. So what university will be like in the future, I think is the question with that. diversity is going to have to be a part of that, because look at the demographics in America. Look who's going into kindergarten. In most kindergarten class now, they're at least 40 to 50%, 60% minority kids. They grow up. 12 years later, that's who's going to be coming out, in terms of that. And so I think diversity is going to have to be a part of that. You can tell it's time for me to retire, but I look at the number of online classes and things. I said, now, with the number of people that are taking online classes and we're still building new residence halls, what's wrong with this picture? So maybe it's time for me to leave. So I don't know what the new university is going to look like. Money is going to become, at least from the state, it's going to become scarcer. Corporations now like to create their own data and everything, so they may not be as willing to fund universities with that. And so I really don't know what the trend, what's going to be. I think it's going to be a change, though.
And then what sort of advice would you give to Black students pursuing higher education?
I think it's a worthy thing to pursue. If you want to change society, I think you're going to have to do it through education. Of course, the question always comes up: how much money can I make? Well, it really kind of depends to a degree on how hard you want to work. There are people in higher ed who make pretty good. If you consider being a president of a university, some of those guys make pretty good. I don't know what this president make, but President Gore was in the neighborhood of what, 450,000, something like that. That's not bad, And then along the way up there are some good positions with that. And so I think the good thing is that if President Obama didn't do anything else, I think he removed that cloud that hung over minorities' head. How high can I go? And I recall when I was in college, and John Glenn made his first flight, which was kind of a half orbit around the Earth. I was in a physics class at that time, and only about 15 of us in the class. And we watched that as much as we could on TV. And we were all excited that he had done it. And as we were leaving, one of the fellows said, he said, "Why are we so excited about this?" He said, "We're never going to get to do that. As Black, we're never going to get to be astronauts. We're never going to be able to do that." And so that hung that cloud over our head, that no matter how good we were in physics, no matter how much we loved physics, there was only so far that we were going to be able to go with it. I think that cloud's gone now. And I think that African Americans and women have to be able to see that. It doesn't mean that you won't bump your head occasionally with that, but there are ways to get that. I think that cloud is removed. And I think each year, in particular with each generation, that cloud recedes further and further back. So it's a matter of what are you willing to work for. In my church, we said miracles happen, but miracles are always wrapped in heart. Miracles don't come easily, So I think that people have to see that opportunities have to be dug out. Very few people just wake up and boom, it's there. You got to work for it. You got to be willing to do that. And there's struggle and there are failures along the way, but you just got to be able to be persistent and stick with it.
All right. Before we conclude, is there anything else you'd like to share about your experience that we haven't gotten a chance to talk about yet?
No, I think we've covered much of it. I've enjoyed my years at Ball State working with students. Sometimes I wish that I had probably done more than that maybe I did. But then on the other hand, you do what you do within the time frame. And so maybe today I could do some things that I couldn't do 15 years ago, 10, 20 years ago, you know, with this. But I've enjoyed my years here at Ball State. I often tell people that people say, well, you've been good for Ball State. And I said, yeah, and Ball State was good for me too. You know, I came here from a black institution with this, and Ball State had to put up with me as well as I had to put up with them. You know, so I appreciate that, and I've enjoyed my time. I have no regrets for having come. Yeah.
All right, then on behalf of the Ball State University African American Alumni Oral History Project, I'd like to thank you so much for all your hard work and participation.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah.